right. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to the Apex Energy Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Al-Qattan. Today, my guest is Kenford Bitana. He's the host of the Lighthouse Podcast. You should definitely check it out. It's got a lot of interesting topics, such as quantum biology and spirituality. How are you doing, brother? Kenford.
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me back on. And yeah, you were one of the first ones to ever interview me. I think um, the conversation we had was, you know, it's good practice to get the message out, no matter how obscure it may seem. You got to keep um, using these opportunities and just build upon each other and keep honing your message. So since that last time we talked, Sarah Pugh invited me on hers, and it was only because you invited me on yours that I felt comfortable to speak.
Yeah,
And so that one did really well. Got through a lot of people, and I'm sure a couple 18 to 16-year-olds watched it. And I feel like I did it justice, and it was only because you gave me that opportunity to speak on yours first. So just want to say thank you for that, man. But overall, been pretty good. How about yourself?
pretty good, brother. Well, I want to thank you as well because I do really think you play an important part of this quantum biology narrative because there just seems to be this big gap between the experts like Dr. Cruz and Dr. Sarah Pugh and Dr. Max Goldhain, even to a certain extent, and people like you. And the gap is I think for young people it's kind of hard to grasp onto these topics, but you really do simplify them in a way. You don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to have a PhD, but I think you just doing the work and reading the literature, and I'm sure you've done a bit more than that, um, and conveying that and kind of packaging it in a simple way, man, it's huge, right? It's you're that middleman. That's the way I kind of see it, and that's how you help me understand a lot of topics within quantum biology. It makes um, seeing or consuming the content a lot easier. Like when I watch a Cruise podcast now, I'm like, okay, now I know what he means by mitochondrial
Yeah,
heteroplasmy because you explained it to me. So I want to thank you for that as well. So
that's the process. And hey, jump on board. We need
yeah,
more middlemen.
yeah, exactly. Well, let's continue off then. Speaking of middlemen, I'd love to just kind of like, just, I don't know how much time you have. Are you like, do you have like maybe an hour or two?
No, I got like 90 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, 90 minutes. I
Hmm.
really want to like kind of pit stop at every, because quantum biology is so vast and there's so many interesting things to kind of cover. And I'd love to just kind of pit stop and address some objections and maybe kind of give a
Hmm.
packaged way of explaining what some of these ideas, if you don't mind. And I'd love to start with non-native electromagnetic frequencies. And I guess I'll start by explaining what I understand from it. And you could tell me if that's correct or not, and give me your take as well. And I've learned so much about non-native electromagnetic frequencies and how it affects our mitochondria. And I've learned about how it affects our calcium channels, which is crucial for our mitochondria and its function and in autophagy and all these different things. So that's really all I know about it. So is there anything you want to like add on to it? Is there much more to the story? Is it just about it affecting mitochondria?
Essentially, yeah, there's more details, obviously. Dr. Cruz has a couple of dedicated non-native EMF episodes, like to 5G, to the RFs. Couple of podcasts that come to mind are his most recent one with Decentralized Health.
Hmm.
Um, he did one with Nick, the EMF guy, and also Dr. Max Gohain. His like later episodes, like the water episodes, they have some interesting details on non-native EMFs. But you're right. The main thing with non-native EMF is how it damages mitochondrial function. And that's what I laid out to you last time, right? With blue light. We could go
Hmm.
into many, details about that, how it damages. But what's the main thing? I laid out how the blue light will affect the mitochondrial theater. That's where the first principle of biology takes place, right? And so non-native EMF will also do that. Um, deuterium, like heavy water, will also do that. So light water magnetism. Oh, and like water, I guess, is the interface because the mitochondria makes that water. And so if you have light and non-native EMF, both are light, um, damaging that stage, then less water is made, and the whole stool just, starts to collapse. But essentially, yeah, calcium, um, it's essentially calcium and less water.
Yeah,
And if
gotcha.
there's less water made, then, you know, that's bad.
Yeah. I've
It's
heard this objection from people about like non-ionizing radiation and ionizing radiation.
yeah.
Do you know, can you tell us a little bit about that or what you know about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny. I've like kind of had to navigate this in my own head. Like, why do people uh this debate of non-ionizing versus ionizing? So let's just like set the stage a little bit. Ionizing radiation is when an X-ray or something has enough energy to literally rip an electron from its orbital, and that electron becomes a free radical, and it causes a bunch of chaos in the rest of the system. Uh, think like Hiroshima, where they literally had radiation poisoning. That was what was happening. These electrons were getting ripped and ripped over and over again, and then lots of cellular damage occurs, right? So when we think of ionizing radiation, we're essentially thinking, free radical damage by that aggressive method. And so when you point out non-ionizing radiation, which is what all for now non-native EMF is, it doesn't have that energy to straight up rip it from the orbital, which is and that's the case they make, right?
Hmm.
Also, another aspect to this argument is they'll use the either industry or something uses like this model where there's like it's like a big head with water inside of it, and they'll put a phone up to the ear of that head, and they'll test for the temperature to
Hmm.
increase or decrease. And if that temperature doesn't increase, then it doesn't, that's translated into it doesn't increase our biological temperature in here. So the two arguments are it doesn't rip that electron orbital, and it doesn't heat up your head like a microwave would. Therefore, non-native EMF is a non-factor, not an issue. And that's the initial wall. And you only need to investigate a little bit past that until you find that that's just a house of cards that is waiting to be pulled. When we talk about non-ionizing radiation, what's the concern? It's free radical damage, right? Ionizing rips the electron just aggressively. So with non-ionizing radiation, we go back to the calcium ion story, right? Essentially, from what I remember, there's a book called EMF by Joseph Mercola, and he lays out this is the mechanism of harm for ionizing, but with non-ionizing radiation, since we figured out that it does affect that calcium influx, that chemical cascade with all that those calcium ions just like flooding the cell, it leads to a chemical cascade that leads to a very potent free radical. I forget which one, like superoxynitrite or something. You can look at the
Hmm.
chemical cascade later and double check me,
Hmm.
but it leads to the same result essentially, a damaging free radical that can harm the cell. So on both sides, no matter how you slice it, it's led to the same result. And he argues that that free radical on the non-ionizing side is actually more harmful than
Wow.
on the ionizing side. Yeah. like it's harder to quench. It's harder to for an antioxidant to quench it and neutralize it. And so you're there the main argument is non-ionizing radiation has no mechanism of harm. And that's not true, right? It's just and also for the heat side, I think that's just a red herring. Um, you're using like, oh, it doesn't cause heat, therefore, and then you present your conclusion, and that's not even the main concern here. So yeah, that one's an easy one, honestly. I think it's just
Okay.
the stubborn one, the stubborn like addiction to technology. We're just hanging on to it. But I don't know. That's not even like that's nothing.
Yeah. Dude, that's concerning, man. Like, I'm surrounded by non-native electromagnetic frequencies. So like, I feel like it would be easy to get neurotic about this stuff. And
Of course.
that's another objection. I don't know if you've seen this, but like when
Mhm.
I tell people about this stuff, they're like, well, listen, everything's bad for you, you know? Like, oh, people tell us that this food is bad for us, this is bad for us. You know, we have to live, you know, and you don't want to be
Mhm.
too neurotic about it. So, I mean, I don't even know how to address that, honestly. Like, how do you go about a modern lifestyle without constantly thinking about or worrying about your health and non-native EMFs?
Yeah, so neurosis is obviously not productive. You're adding to your cup of stress,
Yeah.
but it's good to be aware and discern, like have discernment. It's just if you're like listening to this and you are aware of non-native EMFs and you're getting pretty worried because you live in California, you know, on like some neurosis is warranted, obviously, but take comfort in the fact that you know that you're aware and that just by virtue of being aware of this stuff, you already have a way out eventually. Now, this is something I want to ask Dr. Cruz event like at some point down the line, but with all the stuff he lays out, with how terrible the modern lifestyle is for biology, it's kind of remarkable how we haven't collapsed yet. I think we're like on the verge of an exponential increase, a further exponential increase in diseases, but we seem to be holding on quite well, although there's a lot of low dopamine people who can't catch on. Um, we seem to be like doing pretty well despite all these factors, and it just speaks to the resiliency of biology and nature herself. But do we want to course correct as soon as possible? Absolutely. So, couple ways I'd go about this. Um, he obviously says move, right? And I agree 100%. You live in where do you
Kuwait,
live? Wait, so that's
Middle
not even the
East,
worst.
yeah.
Yeah, that's not even the worst part. Like America is city for city usually worse as a non-native EMF if we're
Mm,
talking non-native EMF soups. So
mm.
you move, Andreas recently moved to Costa Rica. That's always an option for people if you have the resources, if you telework, and then you just lighten your load overnight, right? But most of us don't have that option. We're tied down with a family and a stable job. So this is you can either hire a non-native EMF remedialist, like what's his name? Shane Riley. I'll send you his contact information. You can put it in the show notes, but he will
Mm.
go over to people's houses and literally remediate their EMF environment room by room. He'll look at the power lines outside, tell you
Mm.
if there's huge surges of non-native EMF there. He will, yeah, he'll fly out to you. He's a very caring, nice guy, and in your personal space, he will improve your non-native EMF exposure. And he's gotten a bunch of fantastic reviews, um, glowing 5-star reviews of based off the effects it's had, his work. So you can always learn it too yourself, DIY it. Nick, the EMF guy, is an amazing resources for DIY projects or how you do it yourself. So there's ways. Don't be too down and oh shit, I'm kind of screwed. there once you've crossed that threshold of knowing, okay, now you've got your avenues. The last thing I'd say is this is a touchy thing in the quantum space, within the quantum space, but I'm going to speak on it. Um, I don't think it's practical for us to go back into TPs and tribesman life, right? We in technology is here to stay. It's brought conveniences that are too cinched in for us to just surrender it altogether. So, should we? I think it's better to integrate technology and use it with these EMFs in mind and remediating it at the same time. So, there's these harmonizers talk, and I know most of them are probably not, working, ineffective. But the one person that I think is pretty legit is Dr. Ibrahim Karim. Oh yeah, he's Arabic
Hmm.
himself. He founded the science of biogeometry. It's the physics of quality. And by measuring, let's say you have an EMF reader and you measure the EMF from an iPhone or something. If you like use his device and measure it before applying to the device and after, there would be no difference. But it takes place, the healing of the energy takes place on a dimension beyond electromagnetic energy. It'd be on a level deeper. It'd be, you could say spiritual energy. You could say that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, and he has other ways of measuring the effects, but there's a story he used his shapes, his biogeometry shapes, and there was a town in Sweden, I think it's Hamburg. They were all suffering from the effects of non-native EMFs, and he built a geometric concoction and like put it underground, and the shape determines function, right? A shape of an object determines the function of the energy surrounding it. This is a whole rabbit hole, by the way,
Hmm.
of ether, of energy. Carrie Bennett could wax poetic on this for 3 hours straight, I bet. But
Wow.
yeah, this like so how we could solve it on the level of physicality, right? Physical interventions, remove, go to your house and DIY it. This is like one aspect of we can resolve it. But we could also have some faith and see if this is a valuable option, resolve it on a deeper level of an energy with an energy that is more primordial and can
Hmm.
neutralize some of these things, right? So is there mechanistic proof that this remediates the EMFs itself? That's like it's no, right? If you're looking like on a scientific level, you need data. Uh, it's quantitative studies of statistics at best, but we don't have like mechanisms of how this
Hmm.
energy neutralizes it because we can't see it, right? That's the problem with all the spiritual energy stuff. But are there anecdotes like the one I just laid out with Hamburg, where he neutralized the EMF in that city and the people's health improved overnight? Yes, right. It's been an
Wow.
established sign. Yeah, it would be fascinating for you to talk to him and get his own perspective from it. But he's the leading guy, in my opinion, of this legit harmonizing solution because we do need to integrate technology. This isn't me just rationalizing and justifying my addiction.
Hmm.
It's just me being realistic, right? AI is here to stay. Cryptocurrency is here to stay with Bitcoin. We're all going to be intertwined with technology more and more. Um, of course, we're going to engineer it all to be less EMF harmful, but at the same time, we need mass scale solutions. And so I'd recommend checking those out. So it's go check out his books. First of all, he has 3 books. He has a number of podcasts. He's a he's a fascinating, intelligent individual. If you go down that rabbit hole, I think you'll find some hope And so, yeah, these days I'm not too worried because I'm obviously a big believer in the metaphysical nature of reality, that this physical universe is content, and then we live in a context of spiritual creatorship, right? And
Mm,
so let's use that and translate it into our physical world and help us have it help us. Um, so yeah, there's multiple avenues, and that's what my podcast is about. I traverse both domains. I try to give
mm.
solutions from both domains. Um, but yeah, that's just to recap it. Physical interventions, metaphysical interventions, and you have
Super
all the
interesting. Yeah.
resources there.
I'm definitely gonna check that out for sure. That sounds just so awesome. Yeah, I love this kind of stuff, this new kind of science. It almost sounds, I hate to say it, it sounds
Woo.
pseudoscientific. Yeah, it sounds so woo. And I get all these people on Instagram telling me this is a bunch of woo, there's nothing behind this. But I think those peer-reviewed studies, like those statistics that you're saying, and just quantifying a lot of this stuff is how we get to convince people. People in the West speak the language of science. Most of them do. Would you agree with that? Like
Oh
that's
yeah,
just how they
that's
need that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We the mind these days is convinced by that we take truth to be data and repeated events in time space. And that's cool. Like you have a consistent, you have a consistent happening that could be truth, but truth is just more all encompassing than that. You can't, this is a philosophical subject, but you can't encapsulate truth into physical reality like encapsulate, um, you can't encapsulate the manifestations of number in the concept of infinity, right? Like
Hmm.
number is how infinity manifests. They work together, but you can't put, they work together, but you can't equate them at the same time. And that's what we're trying to do with truth. Like, show me in time space in a randomized placebo controlled trial, then I'll see it as true. And that's like the only way we'll filter it as true or pseudoscience. And that's the rational left brain of Western society. That's probably even going across all of society. Very left brain dominant these days. And I don't know, I think it's good to just zoom out and use both hemispheres and open up to the spiritual, the more, you know, that woo stuff for now.
Hmm.
But yeah, use both. It's such a narrow scope you use if you use just reason and data and randomized controlled trials. You don't need a randomized controlled clinical trial to prove that blue light harms you at night, you know? We did laid
Yeah.
that out last time for with just mechanisms, and there's other ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, I mean, it's important to have both, right? Because then if you just have the right brain without the left brain, then it's like
Mm,
anything goes, right? It's like that order and
exactly.
chaos. Like you need both, it seems. I completely agree. And that's how I've honestly approached uh, a lot of just healing modalities in my life, just using both logic and how does my gut feel about it? What seems right. And speaking about you know kind of making sense and thinking logically, I think this left domination of the left brain has also, to transition now, led people to believe that the sun is toxic for them and that UV light will give people melanoma and skin cancer. And I talked to a person in my own personal life about this, and I'm like, he said it. He was like, no, don't go out in the sun. You're gonna get skin cancer. And I'm just like, that's such a narrow way of thinking about things. Do you ever wonder about, how all life on Earth evolved and what it evolved under? Just think of all of your ancestors hunting outside in the sun. Shouldn't Wouldn't they have all gotten melanoma? Just kind of zooming out and looking at that. So I'd love to kind of address that objection if you can, with a little more detail, if you don't mind.
This has been the story of my life the past 9 months. So
Yeah.
I moved down to Texas to train for the military, and I was just getting into this. I was in my quantum biology stuff, right? I'm already like applying it, and so during lunch, I'm on my lunch breaks. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna bathe in the sun, and this is Texas sun. So
It's
obviously, my
hot.
coworkers are looking at me like I grew a second head. What are you like? What are you doing? You wearing sunscreen? And I'm like, nope. Man, you've been out there for 30 minutes. And I'm like, yup. So it's just like that they're like,
Yeah.
so what are you trying to do here? You're trying to get skin cancer. And I'm like, okay, so let's talk about this. Doesn't hasn't all life evolved underneath the sun? And then it'll transition to an objection about dosage. Okay, that's fine, but you're doing it too much. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
wait. Let's talk. But obviously, it's hard to there's talking points, there's sound bites on why the sun causes skin cancer, and that's all they know. Even if you
Mm,
try to explain, it takes a 2 hour unpacking of of devoted listening to really first get the message. That's not even, it takes time. I'm sure you've experienced this, Sam. I don't know if did you initially believe that the sun caused like I did
yeah.
too, right? Yeah,
I did as well. Yeah.
it took time to transition from that paradigm to this one. So just to set the stage, these people only knew this their whole life. They're probably on technology and phone screens surrounded by non-native EMF. I don't know if you've watched the 2017 Nourish Vermont video from Jack, but he said if a person has low dopamine, which is the product of being in that rough environment we're all in, you could present the truth right in front of their face and they would be blind to it, right?
Mm,
So there's this inability to even comprehend what we're saying. Does that make sense? Like there's a biological or emotional mental wall already,
mm,
lack of capacity. So yeah, if you're feeling a little disheartened, if you're listening to this, you're feeling a little disheartened, like, damn, am I crazy? Like these people just seem pretty hell bent on that the sun causes cancer. You're not crazy. It's just there's multiple layers in between this paradigm and the other one. So just to address the objections. I went with I did a whole podcast on this with Dr. Max Gohane. He obviously the first point he touched on was evolution. And that is something no one can debunk, no one can refute. If the sun causes skin cancer, then how do we even exist right now? How did our ancestors survive long enough to get to this point, right? Skin Sunscreen was invented in the mid 1900s. So you take what is that? Less than 100 years and versus the whole context of human evolution. Isn't there a little bit of a mismatch there? Like, is there a bit of a question mark that arises? So then you go on to dosage. Okay, Kenford, you're spending too much time in the sun. Obviously, some sun exposure is good, but too much. And I'm like, okay, well, did you know that red light is a huge source of bioenergy for us? That C cytochrome oxidase is more efficient when it's under red light, that the sun has 40% infrared light and red light year round. Did you know that we live in blue lit environments that are deficient in red light? If red light helps bioenergetics, which is the currency of biology, if you have less energy, you have more disease. That's just how it is. Why would having more energy equate to more skin cancer, right? If you have more bioenergy from the red light from the sun, you have a bigger buffer. So Red light has that buffering mechanism. It has that mechanism that makes us thrive. It's hard to reconcile that with, oh, but it'll give you skin cancer as well. So already you have some, what we're doing here, Sam, is building cognitive dissonance. Okay. Red light improves your bioenergetics, but UV light also does because UV light drives autophagy and apoptosis through melatonin. And we went into the heteroplasmy story in the last episode. So if UV light drives apoptosis, the very process that goes awry in cancer, right? Cancer is when a cell proliferates and goes haywire. Apoptosis is how it's quenched, right? Cell suicide, and then bam, you don't proliferate. If UV light regulates that process, how would that cause it? Like how does regulating apoptosis back? How does driving the biological mechanism that prevents cancer cause cancer? Does that, it's just, there's no, if you hit these certain talking points, it's hard to come back from it and reconcile it with the paradigm of it causing cancer. You know what they do? All laboratory studies that conclude that the sun causes skin cancer, all they do is put a cell culture in a petri dish and then have a artificial UV light. They look at the results, they see like carcinomas in there, and then they take this artificial picture. This is not the sun, and this is
Mm,
not a whole biological system, and they conflate it for the sun and the whole biological system. An artificial light to a skin culture cell, to us, to nature, this interconnected web that cannot be reduced into a clinical trial. You're conflating A for B, an apple for a tomato. It doesn't make any sense, right?
mm,
These are just a couple veins, I'd say, that you have mechanisms, you have conflation that's not true, and you have evolution, you have context for life. Try try debunking those. You know what I'm saying? It's futile, but there's that dopamine wall. There's the emotional wall of technology. So it's balanced. It's a fine act we're doing here. I don't think it's helpful to be, you know, preachy, about this, but
hmm.
be firm, like really walk them through it step by step, cut down each misconception, and hopefully that dopamine wall breaks. Yeah.
Yeah, I really hope so. I also think to add on to what you're saying, I think a lot of it is just social authority. It's like you're not a doctor. How would you know? I believe all these doctors on, the internet or whatever that I've heard my whole life. Why would I trust you, some random 20-year-old? And I'm like, dude, if you go with that kind of thinking, you're just gonna end up you're literally a sheep by definition. You're not critically thinking about things, not to like demean you, but like you have to like sort things through. You can't just trust what everyone says on the internet, regardless, even if it is quantum biology in this space. I constantly try to question things and ask, just be critical about what I'm learning. And that's how you really arrive at truth, in my opinion. Um, so yeah, okay. Interesting. And there's also the thing about vitamin D, right? About people with melanoma having low levels of vitamin D, and how would that be possible if it means they're not in the sun enough, right? And there's no, like you said, randomized controlled trial where they place people outdoors and indoors and see their levels of it's like an isolated experiment with isolated UV light and cells. So I'm wondering like how have we extrapolated that and now have just put it out on the sirens and on the poster boards that it's bad for us. And I just wonder how these narratives take shape, really. I'm baffled. to be honest. And I was talking to Dr. Max Goldhain, and he was telling me some of the history behind why red meat thing, stuff like the keto diet was demonized. And it turns out that this is all funded by sugar companies, right? These narratives. And then he also told me about this group. I forgot what it was, but this vegan group
Oh yeah,
that
the Seventh Day Adventists.
the Seventh Day Adventists, yeah. And it's just basically he told me that it's a small group of people that want to push a narrative and they have power, and it just dominates a narrative across the entire globe. Um, and it's just amazing to see that. And I wonder if it's just the same thing with the sunlight, right? Like what companies are benefiting from telling people to not go into the sun? And this all ties back to what Dr. Jack Cruz says about people. You literally profit. The medical industrial complex profits off of you not being outside. And man, I really try to dodge conspiracy theories like this, but man, it's hard to unsee when you see it in that way. It's like if the sun really was this free medicine and you had this entity that profited off of having more disease, of course it
Hmm.
has a hand in the pot, right? In the honey pot of telling people to avoid the sun. It's like the greatest marketing campaign ever, but it's also the worst, obviously, because it's completely unethical and against human values. But holy shit, like this is real. Like, what are your thoughts on that? On the medical establishment benefiting and profiting off of this?
Hmm. Yeah, so this is the initial reason why I got into the health space uh in the first place because I think I told you when I first introduced myself on your podcast, initially I just wanted to look good, feel good for myself. But
Hmm.
then I went down that nutrition rabbit hole. And when you go down the nutrition rabbit hole, you're going to have diet camps demonize each other. So they'll point out this guy who created like studies on sugar and called sugar bad, or this guy that called saturated fats bad. So you get exposed to the corruption, the manipulation of narratives that these diet books are trying to undo or trying to find the light in. And so I just realized, and then I realized, okay, from this diet perspective, I do see that 99% of available foods, these available foods being the cheapest, are processed foods. And then I take you back to Weston Price's book, where the people back then in the early 1900s, he was a famous dentist who had who was just, you know, who was thinking, why do they have so much deformed teeth and tooth decay? And then he thought of the subsequent question, how does the primitive people in other lands deal with these tooth decaying diseases? So he had the context of American people having really bad teeth. So then he traveled to primitive lands and he found that these people had amazing, the
Hmm.
straightest, the pearliest whites teeth. And if the oral cavity is a reflection of one's health, as a proxy of one's health, then he found that these people's health were was just immaculate. They were physical specimens, he would call them, right?
Hmm.
And this was the pattern. This was the pattern anywhere he went, from the Eskimos in Alaska to the people in the Swiss, and it was just there was a common theme. They ate foods that were local, that are nutrient dense, and they were in nature. But the craziest thing is when these people moved to modern civilizations like the Americas, where processed food and modernization was just running rampant, these same people started to develop tooth decay and chronic disease. So that obliterates the genetics environment, like argument.
Hmm.
where, oh, these people, these primitive people, they just have superior genetics. And that was just done with those other primitive people moving to modern lands. So I'm using this point to just that was when I realized like, oh man, there's some thing pulling the strings up here. And yeah, that's why I'm passionate about this. So being in that diet space, it wasn't the most effective intervention.
Hmm.
You could eat a lot and do a lot, but for some reason there was something missing within me, and it was just a lot of conflict in the diet space as well. So I did have this in my heart. How can I help uh, a group of people, whoever runs across me? How can I help them reverse their lives? And I'm looking for the most effective, efficient intervention. And that's when I came across quantum biology, which is literally just like a 180 flip to everything we're doing in the modern world. And the craziest thing was I realized that book, Weston Price's book, he has pictures of all these native people, and they're all outside in the goddamn sun. They are following quantum biology's principles effortlessly. And that book is a book about diet.
Hmm.
Weston Price, the author of that book, he didn't know what he did not know what he found. He was emphasizing the nutrition points, all these other points, but he essentially found quantum biology first with
Hmm.
people connected to nature already. So I drew the contrast. We're indoors eating processed food. These guys had perfect health. They're outside eating local nutrient dense food, and it just clicked. So then the conspiracy theory fear just goes away. Once, like you said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. The only thing that makes you doubt is a collective saying the other thing. But you got to reach that conviction in your heart with the people you're around, with yourself, your health experience. Does quantum biology have directionally accurate information that generally improves people's lives? That's not a hard question to answer. Usually I found it to be a yes
Hmm.
all across the board. And so are we doomed? No. Address it one at a time. That's the role of people like us. We all have our ripple effect, and each ripple effect will help another person's ripple effect. It all starts with us. This is why Dr. Cruz has stopped wanting to educate doctors themselves. He's going to the people.
Hmm.
We're gonna get ourselves out of this. And so to tie it back to the authority thing, like we don't need that. We don't need to be doctors. Hippos and lions don't have MDs, you know. They know what to do already. The application's so simple, and we're in this fight together. I don't know if you had these thoughts, but what you were laying out with how crazy and how absolutely crazy this all sounds. Feels like I'm in a movie sometimes, like a
Yeah.
crazy movie that is reaching its climax in the next couple of years or so. And it's going to be an epic ride. I hope to see us all make it to the other side or gather as much people into this Noah's Ark we're building. But
Yeah. 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 I
it's
like
it's
that.
so cool. It's epic just to think about it.
Love that. Yeah. That's awesome. I agree, man. Yeah. I really just want to like pass this important information down to whoever I can and to my kids as well. I'd love to like, maybe I'm too idealistic, but to give them like a proper, healthy, you know, modern lifestyle, but like a healthy modern lifestyle, like truly, to satisfy their needs as well. So it's a journey into the unknown, and I think it requires some courage on our part, man. It's like because it's like when you're in a state where you're afraid, it's easy to follow authority. There's a bunch of
Hmm.
psychological experiments where
Yeah.
it's like it's easy to trust the loudest guy in the room, but yeah, we just have to like learn to trust our intuition again. um
Yeah,
yeah.
if you're in fight or flight, which is what most people are, they're very much concerned with their survival, escaping the present moment. It's hard to zoom out like we do. It's hard. It's almost impossible. Only by grace you'd be able to zoom out and take a step back. It's hard to think long term and through a wide lens if you're just contracted like
Hmm.
this, you know?
Hmm.
So there's grace there. How we take them from this to this, that's a journey I'm, curious about myself. I haven't figured that out, honed that yet. I usually reach the people who are already receptive,
Hmm.
but as for how to open that receptivity up, haven't figured that out yet, but I'm sure we'll find a way.
Gotcha. And really one of the last topics I would like to cover for today is the magnetism part. That part of quantum biology I haven't really been able to crack and understand. I think that this relates to like the northern southern latitude thing. And I actually talked to Uncle Jack, by the way, and he told me, I told him, I'm like, yo, I live in the Middle East. He's like, what is the Middle East? He's like, I'm like, a desert. He's like, well, are there any plants there? I'm like, not really. And he's like, okay, there's your answer. Just get out of there. Like, hey, he told me, he's like, does Mars, is there life on Mars? I'm like, no. He's like, all right, there's your answer. So, I guess, yeah, I guess he doesn't believe in living in deserts. I don't
Yeah.
know even know if that relates to magnetism, but yeah, let's address the magnetism part. Maybe kind of give us um, a nice little package idea of how to optimize magnetism.
Hmm. Magnetism is a black box. A lot of people don't know. We're talking like magnetism in the context of biology. People really don't even know how magnets operate. Like, how does
Hmm.
this metal bar attract other metals? And you have quantum physicists saying relativity does it via this, and then this does it via this. But magnets, just in general, are super mysterious and something to be investigated further. But you don't have to know exactly why it's doing what it does in order to see the patterns it has on uh, biology. So there was an experiment where there was a scientist built like this Faraday cage that cut off the magnetic field, the Earth's magnetic field from a group of people.
Hmm.
And it completely cut it off. They were in there for 2 to 3 hours. And by that point, they felt like they were dying. So he had to cut the experiment off, right? So it was repeated. This experiment was repeated with rats. Um, they were put in a Faraday cage. I don't remember if the magnetic field was reduced to a great degree or completely eliminated, but the rats got obese quick and eventually a few of them died, right? So what we know is that if you cut off this common denominator of magnetism, bad things happen. So what happens on the inverse if you increase it? Well, Dr. Dean Bonley has found that a lot of beneficial biological effects take place. So he built I have it right now by my bed right here. He built this magnet. It's like this big magnet, and you have the Earth's Gauss is like zero point 0.5 Gauss. That's the magnetic strength of it. These magnets are 5, 10, 20 Gauss, depending on the model
Hmm.
you collect. I have the 10 Gauss one, so it's 20 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. And he found that increases detoxification. I have to go on his site and remember what the clinical trial effects were, but whole host of benefits from increased magnetism. I think one of the biological effects is that the ATPase just spins faster
Hmm.
overall. So obviously, if you have a faster spinning ATPase downstream, that's a improved biology, right? So yeah, no, he built this thing, and you could also kind of do the same thing if you move down to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, where the asteroid hit. There's an increased magnetic field there. It's a roughly 3.4 Gauss, if I remember correctly. But yeah, the main biological benefit, increased ATPase that's in your mitochondria, better running mitochondria, and everything else downstream is better overall.
Hmm.
So yeah, magnetism is the least fleshed out, I'd say, of the three-legged stool. Light and water, everyone's working on those, but magnetism is a mystery, and it's very interesting. I think Carrie Bennett's one of the few people that are diving down that rabbit hole, and it'll be cool to see what she says.
Gotcha. Yeah, so you're saying you don't like we don't know at all, like, or we don't know too
We
much
like
about this stuff.
we know some, but not to the degree that we know light and water, you know.
Yeah,
Light and
yeah.
water, it's we have a
Everyone talks
lot
about
there.
it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. And then I kind of really wanted to end it on the spirituality stuff because I'm really interested in this stuff. I've just been fascinated in it. I know you had a guest on your podcast who had this ayahuasca trip and she was talking about it. I thought that was a really interesting episode. And I always love hearing people's stories on their trips and you know the truths they come across and realizing the interconnection of those truths with across different people. Always been fascinated with that. I want to ask you: do you have a big eureka moment in your life in terms of spirituality?
Yeah, so this has been a lot very much on my mind. I want to tie it back to that conversation of people only are convinced of things that happen in time space that are repeatable, done in controlled settings. I feel like spirituality has another dimension of truth that is not provable. And what I mean by that is it's not it's not like you can prove it in this external event, time space event, and repeat it so that people from the outside will look at it and say, "Oh yeah, spirituality is valid now." It's more of a experiential inner realization that you cannot miss. Once it lands, it just doesn't leave ever. So spirituality is not provable, but it is confirmable. And each person's trip, each person's spiritual awakening is that confirmation. That's how we build the communities. But we live in a society where it's left brain dominant, where you need the proof in the physical happenings and data, quantitative studies. Spirituality is like a qualitative experience, like qualitative means experience, right? So there's this bridge between dimensions and hemispheres. So how I came across it was I had feelings for this girl in the middle of my military training. I was really into her. She was my good friend as well. But growing up, I was very needy, and once I had someone like on site, I wanted them with all my heart. And I told her, she didn't reciprocate, and so she started being really good friends with another guy, and that made this deep jealousy arise. And anytime I saw them hang out, it kind of like really pissed me off. So I would try to cling at her and say, "Hey, we should hang out. We should hang out," and it ramped that up more and more and more. Nothing like crazy, crazy, but Internally, it felt like my world was ending and I was just trying everything to keep it stable and safe. So obviously that is a repelling behavior. You don't want someone, clinging at you. You naturally repel that stuff. So one day she just pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you're being too much. What do you want me to do? We're not even in a relationship and you're acting like this. You're my friend and you're acting like we're in a damn relationship. I feel like I'm in a relationship, but we're not. So stop. Let's stop." And so she broke that off, and that sent me into a downward spiral emotionally. And in previous downward spirals, I've had many in my before this happening. What I would do is I'd go on Reddit or YouTube and I'd search up my problem and see what YouTube video or thread comes up and ease myself that way. Uh, didn't bring the best long-term results most of the time though, but some things worked and some things didn't. So this time I went on YouTube and Reddit. I came across this guy, Aaron Doughty. He was a law of attraction teacher, and he's saying like, let things go, let it go. Law of attraction. You gotta set intentions. This was my introduction to beginner spirituality, where you're doing all these things to attract or setting intentions. And at this point, I'm so down that I'm willing to try anything, right? I was never into that stuff in the past. So that stuff's like, it's kind of working, but in my day-to-day life, it feels like I'm struggling to hold myself together, that I could just break apart at any time because I just lost that one person who I equated all my love to. And so one day I'm like, man, this guy's stuff isn't working. Let's go on Reddit. Is this dude a scam? Okay, so I search a Reddit thread and it has, is Aaron Doughty a scam? And one of the answers was, no, he's not, but you should look up this other guy. His name's Aaron Abke. He's way more genuine. He practices what he preaches. Check out his videos. And so I did. I clicked on a video of Aaron Abke's called Mind Science 12, The New Self-Love. It's a topic about self-love. Watched a couple of those, but in that video, he essentially like said, "Hey, forgive everything you've ever done. Why? Because you didn't know better at the time. If you had done better, if you had known better, you would have done better. And that is the case for everyone too. If they had known better, they would have done better." And at that moment, experientially in my heart, it clicked because I realized that my whole life, when I was trying to fill that void in my heart, all I was trying to do was do better, right? I was trying to do better, but I didn't know. Um, when I was when I was holding on to my friend for dear life, I had equated her with love, and anyone, that's something we all share universally. You will you will go through mountains and valleys for love, no matter how it's symbolized in your life, because that is what we all seek. So with me, it was in her. And so of course, if I see her as my love, I'm going to fight tooth or nail to keep it. And so I was holding myself down for that. But then I realized how innocent it was. Like, oh, I was doing that because I wanted to feel whole in here, and I saw that out there with her. And that is not something you hold yourself against. That is something you can forgive and let go. And so in that moment, I had this huge release of, wow, yeah, I was innocent for doing that. Like, obviously, I'm going to apologize for holding on to her, but internally, I forgave myself. And then a downstream effect was I realized everybody is doing the same thing, where they don't know any better. So if you hold something, they don't do better because they don't know any better. If they knew better, they would have done better. So if I look back to my family life, I held a lot of stuff against my family for what they did. But then I realized, oh, they just didn't know because they had family who abused them, and that family didn't know. And so you keep going back and back and back. Who are you going to blame? Who who wears the sackcloth of guilt? Who do you point and say it's your fault? It kind of just disappears in this infinite context where we all just didn't know. And in hindsight, obviously we know, but we don't. And so when I went out into the world post this realization, all I saw was just people trying their best, you know, doing the best they can at what they had. I saw that they had pasts that weighed them down, and that manifested as complaining, as victimization, as judgment. But I couldn't like hold it in my heart to judge them because I realized they didn't do that stuff in a vacuum. Hurt people hurt people. They're hurting inside, whether they know it or not. And it manifests like that. And that is a subjective inner realization you see within yourself. That is not something you see with your left brain. It's something you see with your heart. And so at that point, I had this euphoria, this spiritual high of like nothing in my life had changed externally. I was in the same school, same people, but I was happier. I was happier because my judgments subtracted, not because I acquired, not because I gained, not because something changed, not because an outcome was fulfilled. No, it was because I saw less of the mind's tricks. I saw the love that was already there. And I was like, wow, this is the answer. And you just kind of know. But it sounds ridiculous to the left brain who hasn't had that experience. So the only issue is a knowledge gap. One of us had this experience and the other doesn't. And this is the bridge we're trying to cross in life, uh, in my podcast, etc. And so everyone's gonna bloom in their own time, but they're in the hands of God. So I leave it up to the creator for what everyone else is doing. But how you and I can best impress upon people is embodying what we preach. We can preach from our mind, we can bark as loud as we can, but it's who we become and who we are that leaves the deepest impression for those dopamine walls, those emotional walls to be broken through like a dam, like it happened for me. And so the best thing we can all do is just focus on yourself and be your best embodied self, radiate like a bright lighthouse, and people will come after you. So that is the importance of spirituality. I don't think we can breach those walls without it. That's why I do both. Uh, and yeah, it's hard to speak scientifically about it. Sounds like a bunch of subjective happenings, but a photon recognizes its essence in the sun. You don't have to be this part can recognize it that is part of the whole and know it internally. And you don't need anything more than that. So, yeah.
Wow, that was beautiful. So eloquent. Wow. Dude, yeah, so do you I I've come to the same like it's so funny. Yeah, we all have these different stories and these different experiences, but I really like feel connected to certain parts. When you talk about certain things, it's like I've felt that before. I've had like
Hmm.
very similar outcomes, but the direction to get there, was completely different. So it's so interesting, and it reminds me of that when you were talking about not judging. It reminds me of that Jesus quote where he says, "Forgive them, for they do not know that they are wrong, that they have wronged."
Dude, dude, so I was not Christian, but
Yeah.
I had
Oh,
that
okay.
awakening, and then I read that quote, and I was like, oh my God, that is what he was talking about. So you feel those Jesus quotes in your heart. And so
Yeah.
obviously now every quote he drops is just gems. So many gems in
They're
each one.
bangers, bro. He's
There-
yeah.
He drops bars.
He drops. Yeah, dude, I've had a similar story, and when this happened to me, I started looking around the world, and just like how you're saying, all of these like masters, all of these people that people look up to, I'm like, oh my God, I really understand what they're saying now. A lot of these like, prophets or wise people or philosophers or whatever. I'm not saying I'm like at their level, but it's like it just hit different, man. It's like it made me feel so connected. And I don't know, I think yeah, if you are stuck in this material world, of course you're going to feel disconnected. Of course you're going to feel detached and lonely. And I think, in our Western culture, I'm kind of overgeneralizing, but the with the rise of this hyper individualism, this left brain materialistic kind of thinking, you get an epidemic of loneliness with that, right? It's just has to come along with it. Um, but man, this world that you're talking about, this internal world, once you submerge yourself in it, it's like inadvertently makes you feel more connected to other people. Like it's almost like reaching down into the source of whatever you are. And when you touch upon that source, you touch upon other people's sources because we all come from a
Hmm.
similar source, and we do. And I connected that, dude. I thought I was crazy at the time. I was like, I connected that to like evolution and how we all came from this one organism. We all, all
Mm.
Homo sapiens have a common ancestor. So I'm like, even in a material world, that's true. That still stands
Yeah, it
true that
is.
we come from the same source.
Hmm.
So I wonder if you had similar thoughts like that at all, like kind of
Oh,
realizations.
100%, man. It's this whole creation versus evolution discussion that's going on. I think creation is evolution. Creation isn't stagnant. It evolves. It moves. It's dynamic. That is evolution itself, right? So everything we're talking about spiritually probably has a physical manifestation, has a physical parallel because they're one and the same. They're both we live in both these domains at the same time, right? And with physicality, I just see all the connections, how it all ties, uh, all the science, organisms like ecosystems. I think oneness, interconnection, like these organisms are so intricately intertwined that you take one of them out, it damages a lot downstream. I don't know if you've seen that video, how the wolves change rivers in Yellowstone Park. That's a beautiful example
Hmm.
how they introduced wolves back into Yellowstone Park and the ecosystem thrived,
Wow.
based on that one introduction. Um, yeah, I see the spirituality in nature. I see the absence of spirituality in modern society. Of like you said, if you think physicality is all there is, you're bound to be lonely and nihilistic, right? Because you think you have a expiration date and that you will cease to exist, that you will be extinguished. And that's our biggest fears. Obviously, there's like the whole religious cloud that people will fear a god. If there is a god, they'll fear that one that punishes them for not following certain rules and whatever. Uh yeah, it's this just such an interconnected web of so many layers of paradigms, people, philosophies, all running simultaneously yet functioning together. Uh, it all ties, man. Definitely does. And I live in that world. It's fascinating. Uh, Going back, it feels like I'm in the most epic movie that is ongoing. And I'm like, wow, my soul chose to be incarnated at the perfect time because this is epic. This storyline I'm seeing unfold.
Amazing. And I just kind of want to, I was wondering, how do you apply that spirituality to your own life? Because I've had struggles, with unconditional love. Like,
Yeah.
just like you said, like it's, don't judge people, or not just to like follow a strict rule of don't judge people, but to feel that on the inside,
Hmm.
and to really truly have unconditional love. And I've had a similar story with a girl where I had my heart broken, and I was really clingy and all this shit.
Hmm.
But the lesson in the end was to love a person not conditionally, and because, oh, you give me this or you give me that, but to love them even if they're in your life, they're out of your life, if they hate you, if they love you, you still have this love for them. That concept, it's easy to kind of conceptualize and think about, but I think practically it's difficult. Um, and I've had doubts sometimes. I'm like, does is this just some mumbo jumbo that I was caught up in once, or can I really truly apply this to my life and to my family? So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
That's there's in the spiritual journey, you reach that initial awakening. It's euphoric. It's amazing. So inevitably you go to the books, you learn from sages, philosophers, all this stuff, and you become very acquainted um in your mind. But after a certain point, that will start to backfire on you. You'll start to doubt yourself. Um, I'm still suffering. Why isn't this translated into my experience? And yeah, I've reached a point. I'm at that point right now where you are trying to bring all this, knowledge soup down to here as a felt experience. Uh, and honestly, the jump we have to make is looking at every single experience like it's our teacher. We gotta, if something moved us off our center of peace, we gotta investigate why that is. Did it make me sad, angry, fearful? And you look at those emotions, we tend to resist them, you know. But if you look at it, you know, rudimentarily speaking, when you're sad, think about the heartbreak, right? Any heartbreak. That person you know, feel like you lost, that person symbolized love, right? And so essentially, you feel like you lost love. That's sadness. And isn't that like so innocent? When you're sad, you just want to be loved, you know? Isn't that so pure? Like a child who just lost their toy. They're crying and they're like, "Oh, I just want." Like, isn't that so the innocence, the purity of that, right? It's an emotion that we all resist. But if you have to like dive into it, go deeper into sadness and really see it as the gem, the light that it is. It is just my desire to be loved. And that is so lovable. It's universal. It transcends languages, races, species. You know what I'm saying? It's what we are, right? So then when you experience sadness, you can kind of just no, this is okay. I love this sadness as it is. Uh, and you don't have to change. And then you start to fill your own cup because you're becoming that love for yourself, right? So then you go to anger. Man, like I'm really pissed off at the world, at big pharma. These guys are selling drugs, milking the people's cash at their expense. Like, how can we look at that? So then let's look at it like, man, you really love righteousness, don't you? You love these people. You want their highest good. You want them to be thriving. You are mad at them being harmed. That is compassion, right? That is compassion with an inferno under it. You love righteousness for others and for yourself. Anger is that moral compass that we all have, that love for righteousness, that, you know, good for everybody. Um, that's pretty lovable, isn't it? You know, it's more aggressive. It's probably more difficult for some people, but isn't that also like lovable? It's also pure. That's yeah, that's the purity of anger. Then you move on to fear. These are like the three main emotions. Fear, if you're on stage or publicly speaking, or if you're yeah, something that arises fear. Fear is you just wanting to be safe. Isn't that right? Maybe you're scared that these people are going to throw tomatoes at you and that your reputation's going to be washed and that will damage you, you know, your career, etc. You just want to protect yourself. It's your self-care, right? It's your self-love for yourself. Um, it's a difficult emotion as well, but the more you dive into these three main emotions that color our lives and sit there, don't even conceptualize this framework. Just you have to come to it experientially. Then you see the purity of each one. And then when you heal that psyche in yourself, that human in yourself, then you make yourself whole. And then you can bridge the gap to higher states of realization that we all read about, we all want to attain. But we all skip the rudimentary work of meeting our human emotions at their heart. And so that's where I'm at, healing that human. Um, yes, I want to be enlightened already, but I know that it's not it's not that's not realistic and that will just block me. But the main thing is if you're a spiritual seeker, you're probably in a left brain block. You got to meet your feelings with your heart every single day. It's going to be difficult. It's hard. It doesn't feel fancy at all. It feels like you're not progressing because you're feeling all this negativity, but that emotion is the way, right? Jesus said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." Your feelings are your neighbor. Your thoughts are also your neighbor. They are with you. They are from you. They are your appearance. So you gotta love all that in your own umbrella, and you set the stage for future realization.
All right. Well, Kenford, it's really a pleasure talking to you. I'm really impressed by your level of intellect. You're also just so eloquent. I feel like I'm listening to an audiobook and not speaking to a person, and in a good way. But yeah, man. Any closing thoughts you want to give to the audience or to anyone in general?
In my workspace, I see a lot of people. There's enlisted and there's officers. Okay, enlisted you could think middle class. Officers you could think high middle class. My coworkers will cap themselves at, hey, I want to retire as an officer, have that pension, be pretty comfortable, right? It's a pretty comfortable existence. I'll give them that. But I'm thinking, man, whatever your beliefs are, whether you only have one life or this is one life of many, you do have this life. Why cap yourself like that? Go for the stars, shoot for the moon. You have this life, make the most of it. Be bold, be delusional. So much so that your peers think you're crazy and go for it. Now don't take the practicality out. There's use for the left brain. We've been hammering on the left brain this whole podcast, but there's use for it. Use both hemispheres. Use that right brain to set the sights. Go for your biggest, most inspirational vision, but then use your left brain to make that manifest. Use the practical steps to get it there. I just want to call for boldness in people's lives. We can all be, this universe is like an endless pie that we all have the biggest share of. And I've met some of that person I talked to you about who was responsible for my spiritual awakening. I've met him recently,
Hmm.
and it was great. Obviously, amazing time, but honestly, man, he was such a normal guy. You know what I'm saying? Like I
Hmm.
expected some radiant light. This guy's different from me.
Yeah.
But no,
Yeah.
he's like the same as me. And seeing him actualize in his success and seeing the sameness in me and seeing the sameness in my coworkers who aren't aware and or privy to any of this stuff, we all share that same thread. So it made me think we all have that capability, all of us. And I just want to give you permission to shoot for the stars, be your best self, and also love that journey on the way there. So you are you incarnated in the most epic time you could even conceive of. So make your story epic.
Amen. Thanks for coming on, brother.
Thank you for having me back.